Little tweaks and giant wins. Consistently, time and time again. I've been working on me, making little tweaks. I'm on a winning streak, making little tweaks 1 inch at a time. Create giant wins, I know it because I'm living my best life, living better than good. Welcome to the podcast with Jill Underwood. This is another episode of Little Tweaks and Giant Wins.
Hey, welcome back to Little Tweaks and Giant Wins. I am Jill Underwood, your hostess. Today, have I got a treat for you. I am here with Joel Goldberg. You are such an inspiration to our world, Joel. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast today.
Well, it's good to be with you, Jill. Thank you. Great to see you virtually, although I saw you recently in person as well.
That was so cool. Those boys were thrilled to meet you, and I really appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. That's fun. That's fun stuff.
Well, for those of you who might not know Joel Goldberg, he's an icon in Kansas City. He is the announcer for the Kansas City Royals baseball team. And actually, I met you, Joel, right after the Royals won the World Series. You had the big ring and everything.
Yeah, that ring is, how do I best say it? You could probably describe it better than me. It's not on the the simple under the radar size, I guess you could say, right? It is big and blingy. It is big and blingy and gaudy, as anyone that I guess wins a world championship should get in this day and age of those type of things. And I never thought that I would wear something like that. I'm not, a player or a coach or anything. I'm not even employed by the Kansas City Royals, but they felt strongly enough about all of us broadcasters and, our small part in it. So that made the rounds quite a bit in 2016 and 17. Then I kind of put it away, and it comes out for special occasions, speaking engagements, that type of thing. But yeah, it's definitely a showstopper. It's not something I would recommend someone put on and go through the grocery store, because you won't make it very far. It could be good at a bar, I suppose, every now and then if you're thinking about maybe a drink or something like that.
I love it. So tell us, I love your story about how you got into broadcast. Tell us a little bit about your story, how you got started, and where you're at now.
Oof, it's a long one. I'll try to give you the brief version, but that's all I ever wanted to do. And I think that we all grow up with dreams, and I think if I were to say that I'm, that lucky and rare person that actually had the dreams come true from a very early age, that that in itself to me is something I'm incredibly grateful for. But at the same time, none of our dreams, even when they come true, ever look exactly the way you pictured it, right? I mean, a dream never is completely real if we're getting technical. And so when I look back at those dreams, they were probably a little bit jumbled. And how do you dream of something 20 years down the road or whatever it might be, when the world will be different then? And so I knew I wanted to be on TV. I knew I wanted to talk about sports. I thought that probably was something in terms of being the local sports anchor on the news, which I did do for a while, or maybe being on something like SportsCenter, or going back to the two big cities that I grew up in, Chicago or Philadelphia. None of those things happened, but growing up, there weren't pre and post game shows on television. There weren't even a whole lot of sideline reporters at that point. Now everybody wants to be a sideline reporter, and so I've been lucky enough for 27 years to live that dream, and still living it. But to have envisioned it being the role that I had with the Kansas City Royals, or any baseball team for that matter, was not something that I could have put those pieces together. And then everything else that's come from it, which I know that we'll talk about, is certainly not anything that was ever in my mind. So it's been an incredible run, and very, very, very fortunate. And I know that people can say that a lot. I'm blessed, I'm fortunate, I'm grateful, I'm all those things. But I do sit there and think that if this hadn't worked out, the odds were against it working out, I don't know what the heck I would have done. I'd like to think and hope that whatever it is, I would have been successful in, I hope, but I don't know if I would have found my passion or anything like that. So unbelievable that it actually came true and that it's still going.
But you know what? you've worked your butt off to get here, right? You've worked hard consistently all along the way, which I believe is part of your message that you teach when you do public speaking. So yeah, we're all grateful, but you've put in the work.
Yeah, and I think that I'm proud of that. I mean, certainly I'm proud of the fact that I'm doing what I loved, and you know, I think a little jaded too, not necessarily in a bad way, but just in a sense that anytime you do something and you have some success and it becomes part of your everyday life, it can be easy to take some of that for granted. So I don't know what it's like to go to a job in another profession. I don't know what that normal looks like. And I mean, I always say that if people can say the title of what you do and understand it, then there's definitely there's an understanding of what your job is, even if they don't know the details. Meaning, when you say someone's, hey, what do you do? And it's, well, I'm the vice president of blah, 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 blah. You're like, what is that? Or what is that industry? When someone says, I'm a mortgage loan officer, I'm a doctor, I'm a television broadcaster. Well, most people, as you know, don't know what goes into all the details of being a loan officer. They don't understand all the stuff, but they know what it is. Right. So mine is that on a higher level because people see it. If they don't see it, they might even make it out to be bigger than it is. And so, you become jaded by this business just in the sense that everyone has an idea of what you do and they all want to talk about it, which for the most part is great because I love sports. But there's so much more that goes into it. And so I know that the question was about the hard work, but I think that falls in there too. It's like people don't necessarily see the hard work. I don't need them to see the hard work. Or even the inner workings of the business, that you're supposed to see the finished product just the way you're supposed to see your finished mortgage. You don't need to know what goes into the liens and the title and all that stuff. Like, people don't want to know that stuff. That's why they're, paying someone like you. That's why they watch someone like me. But there's so much more that goes into it. And the hard work part to me is something that we all have control over. And, you generally get what you put into it. And quite honestly, I don't have to put in. When I started in television 27 years ago, I was regularly working 14-hour days just to prove myself, get that experience. What more can I do? I didn't have any other life. I didn't have a family. I was living in a small town. What else am I going to do? So if you finish your first shift and do the early news, why not stay and do something for the late news? And so, that's all that hard work and the building blocks. And I think that my profession, like a lot of others, but maybe more so because it's so cutthroat, that this profession will get rid of anyone that doesn't want to put in that work initially, for the most part. And so it might be, well, I don't want to. What am I going to? Why would I take that job if it pays me in 1994 $13,500 a year when I can go get a job with a marketing firm for 25 or 30,000 out of college? Or why do I want to go live in this small town in northern Wisconsin when I could live in Chicago with my buddies and do that kind of thing? And so that's where I'll hear from a lot of former classmates of mine that say, "Boy, I'm jealous of what you're doing, but I've also spent more time at home. I've done." So there's always that what if, and I've never had that what if. I've never had the what if. But if I wasn't willing to put in that hard work, and that's the part that nobody sees. They see the finished product on television, but the amount of hours and just, sacrifice, not just personally over the years, family, and not being around for a lot of things. So I say all of that with none of it being a complaint, because I certainly have every step of the way had the opportunity to go do something else. And I can't really envision ever having done that.
Tell me what happened and how you had to shift when COVID hit and when there was no baseball happening. What went through your mind and how did you shift a year ago?
Yeah, I mean, I was scared. And, I think there are a couple things here. I moved from St. Louis, which was my previous job for 9.5 years, to Kansas City, my family, in 2008. It's basically the same job with more responsibility, more airtime, more exposure, better for the brand. I don't know that I was thinking that way. I was thinking about more airtime and And my wife had grown up in Kansas City, and we had family here still. So it was going to be an easy move from that standpoint. But the big adjustment when I came here, along with the fact that I was going to be doing every game, not just select games, was that I went from being a salaried employee to a freelance paid by the game. And I had, well, still to this day, I've only missed one game in 14 years. I had 5 or 6 where I was away on assignment in the Middle East with troops, but I I've only missed one game because of a funeral, and so knock on wood, as I knock on this head of mine, I've been lucky enough to be able to stay healthy and take a lot of pride in being there every day. So that whole idea worked out great until the pandemic hit, and then there were no games, and so the freedom of not having a salary and having off seasons and doing whatever I want was great until it was like, oh my God, it's March 2020. So the paychecks for us, it's a year's worth of pay in 6 months. They stop the first week of October generally, and they start the first week of April. Well, we find out just before that, we might be out for 2 or 3 weeks. And I remember thinking, I think it's going to be more than a few weeks, but I think it'll be 4 months. So, yeah, I was scared. I was panicked. And now suddenly it's, collecting unemployment for the first time in my life. And, thankfully, I had started the speaking career 3 years before. That didn't help me in the moment because nobody was hiring speakers in the early stages of the pandemic. And I'd started a podcast. And so that was good. And I just kind of doubled, tripled down on it, went from a few times a week to every day of the week and thought, what, let me just see if I can connect with people this way. Let's see, people are wanting something, some kind of connection. And so started streaming everything live. And then suddenly the virtual speeches started coming. And it was like, boy, I've had all this time for these 4 months to really work on my business, to really build relationships, even if they were virtually, reach out and help some people instead of feeling sorry for yourself. Stay afloat, just tread water, do what you got to do. And suddenly baseball came back, the business picked up, podcast picked up, and everything kind of worked out.
I love that. That's what made me, I watched you during that time, because you had reached out to me and you wrote this book. Wasn't the book about that same time?
Yeah, it was during that time. And, there are a lot of things I missed just with baseball. I mean, I'm still I'm trying to figure this all out. I'm scaling my company. I'm trying to, hire the right people to help me do the things that I so often miss, especially during baseball, the reaching out, to you, which then oftentimes when baseball starts, it's like and people seem to understand it. They see where I'm at every single day. So it's not like I've disappeared. I'm very visible, but I haven't figured out fully yet, getting better, how to be able to touch that business every day in the middle of the baseball season. So the pandemic gave me the chance to work on a lot of those relationships and those connections and have more opportunity because I was home. I was probably putting in, I mean, I remember saying this, that I was working out of the house and probably putting in the type of hours in 2020 that I put in 1994, 1995, those 14-hour days. I mean, I was from 8 a.m. until sometimes 10 or 11 p.m. I was just, most of it was not even monetized, but I was just, I almost felt like the only way I could survive the pandemic was to outwork the pandemic. And I knew it wasn't healthy. But I just felt like that was the only way that I can control things. And since I'd lost, control of that. So along the way and during that process was writing the book. And the goal was to write the book in 2020. I was lucky enough that there were some offers out there. Community America, their CEO Lisa Ginter was very interested in purchasing copies for all of her employees, and then so that was sort of my goal, is to get it done for the holidays for her deadline, and that was going to be my motivator to just, like a lot of people talk about, I've always wanted to write a book, but you put it off and put it off, and me too, because if you haven't done it before, it's a scary thing. And so I remember reaching out to Lisa maybe June of the pandemic, and I'd been outlining and messing with ideas for the book for well over a year. And I expected her to say, yeah, with the pandemic, let's hold off. And she said, nope, we'll be ready to go. And I thought, boy, I got to get going here. And so that became like my everyday existence in the midst of all the other stuff, was just right. I mean, the good news is it's not like I'm writing fiction. It's not like I'm developing characters. It's not even from a standpoint of research that I had to do a lot, because I'd done most of the work already based on baseball interviews, and television interviews, my own personal story, and then a lot of the podcasts that I'd done, that it was all there on record. I decided, the bigger challenge was, what did I want to include? How do I format it? What goes where? And I mean, so it was a very challenging and, stressful process. But, come around Thanksgiving time, 2020, the book was done and it came out the middle of December. And really one of the great developments personally for me during the pandemic.
I love it. And I love your book. And remind me someday, I need to get you to sign it for me. I'm in the process of writing a book, and I've been a writer my whole life, so to speak, right? But this has been one of the hardest tasks I've ever challenged myself to do. It's hard to write a book and put it together. And for me, part of mine is I'm sharing myself, and that's hard to do too.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think this is the same thing for a speaker on stage, for an author, even a podcast host, at times is, especially in my world, as much as visible as I can be, I'm generally talking about other people, not myself. And, a lot of the advice I've received along the way is, you got to make yourself vulnerable. You have to be able to put yourself out there too. And so I tried to do that, probably still not as much as I could have. And maybe next time around I'll do that. But I do think that's hard. It's so much easier to shine the spotlight on someone else. But I think that readers, attendees of an event, whatever it might be, they like, as they should. I do. They like humility. They like real. They like authentic. We've always heard all of that, and then you get there by giving them a glimpse of your world and letting your guard down a little bit. And that's a hard thing to do, to put on
Yeah, I completely agree. I love that. So you are a public speaker, and that's how I met you. I met you a
paper.
number of years ago when I heard you speak, and your message was extremely compelling. Share with my listeners, what is your message when you stand on stage and speak in front of, hundreds, if not thousands, of business people?
Yeah, and it's one that has evolved in some ways. Certainly, I feel like now I understand when like musicians. I'm not a musician. We as listeners sometimes have that nostalgia for the first time we ever heard a band and that first album. And, and I've talked to some musicians over the years. And I'm like, oh, that's my least favorite album. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what I got introduced to. So, the speaking, you saw an early version of it. And, I cringe a little bit now at what that early version looked like versus now. But I think that the theme, for the most part, has stayed the same. I mean, I wrestled for a while with, I need all these topics, and early on, I was speaking about championship culture, because coming in here in 2008, the Royals were one of the worst teams in baseball, and one of the first messages I got from their general manager, now President Dayton Moore, was, I'm trying to build a championship culture, and I didn't really understand what that meant, and so I had a front row seat to watch them not only build a champion on the field, but to build an organization, not just what's in the locker room, of high level culture. And, that's everybody from the security guard to the accountant to the team trainer to the players to the broadcasters, even if we're not employed by them, and on and on. Like, do you fit? Do you fit this great culture? And so I knew that was my expertise, having had watched it and had so much perspective on it. And that's what the podcast became about. And then the book. And so I'll just back up to, when you saw me, I hadn't come up with this yet, but what was championship culture? And I think I had a separate speech on networking. So I'm like, okay, I can do that too. But early on my podcast, I would ask guests, it's called Rounding the Bases. It's not a baseball podcast, but I have my 3 baseball themed questions. What's the biggest home run you've hit? What's the biggest swing and miss you've taken professionally? Because sometimes you get somebody that says, well, back in college I hit this 3-run home run. I'm like, no, I don't mean that. Or oftentimes it's like, the biggest home run I've hit is my wife or my husband or my kids or whatever. And I'm like, I don't doubt it, but for the sake of learning. So I always say, professionally speaking, what's the biggest home run? What's the biggest swing and miss? And the third question is, what is small ball? What are the little things that add up to the big results? And that became the theme of the book. So small ball to me was sort of my culture question, dressed up as a baseball theme. Small ball culture. What's on the inside? And so the speech has evolved, similar to what you saw initially, although the content with the podcast and all the baseball stuff is always evolving daily, is now it falls under the umbrella. The book is Small Ball, Big Results. Small ball, so I'll say to a company, what are you wanting out of this? What are your company's, what's your mission statement? What are your visions? What are your values? What do you want to tackle here? And so I had 13 topics of different small ball topics in the book. And I have yet to do a speech since the book came out, or before for that matter, where their needs don't fit under one of those topics, or usually multiple topics. So whether it's how to build trust, or how to pivot, or the power of mentorship, or just the importance of people, which I can't state enough. It sounds so simple, but as David Glass, the late owner of the Royals, would say to us all the time, you do everything in life through people. And that's true if you're a billionaire owner like him, or whether you're a startup entrepreneur just trying to stay afloat. So it's all these different elements. And then I think, Jill, and I knew this going in, but I'm very comfortable now in this space, is that I full well understand that my strengths and my gift beyond being a broadcaster is connecting with people and storytelling. So to me, it's great to get in front of an audience that loves the Royals or loves baseball. But I want to hear from that person in the audience that sheepishly comes up afterwards. And I always know where they're going because I can see it in their face and hear their voice. They say, I got to admit something to you. And I just let them say that I don't like baseball at all. I'm not a fan. And they're expecting me to be offended. And I'm like, no, that's totally cool. They're like, but I love your message. So, powerful and effective storytelling. It doesn't matter the topic. I'm just lucky enough that baseball lends itself to so many interesting stories that, it's a nice way to connect the dots.
I love that. That's fantastic. So if I may, let me turn this around and ask you your significant questions. So what's your biggest swing and miss that you've had in your life?
The biggest swing and miss, I think, for me, was just never understanding the relationship end of my business. And the interesting thing about that is that I did understand it in terms of getting a job, traveling the country, knocking on doors, building relationships that way. I never understood it with the athletes. So I think my biggest swing and miss is that I still had too much fan in me. I'm just as much a fan today as I was back then. It's very much business for me. And that's, again, being a little bit jaded. It's one of the very few downfalls of doing this, is that you don't get the same joy as the irrationality, that's a word, of a fan. Part of the fun of being a fan is being irrational and, living and dying for every moment. And part of what we do is we just keep on rolling along, good or bad. And so early on, I was still very much that fan. I was irrational. I get upset after the losses because I wanted the team to do well. And I never understood. So I was putting these guys on a pedestal the way a lot of fans do. Some fans will just treat them as normal, but for the most part, I go, oh my God, that's Salvador Perez. Oh my God, that's Albert Pujols. Oh my God, that's Michael Jordan, or whatever it is. And so the biggest swing and miss was I was thinking that way too, which really prohibited me from focusing on the relationships. And once I understood, and it took me really the better part of 13 years into my career until I understood how to connect with the biggest superstars. And once I understood how not to treat them as superstars, respect, yes, but to treat them as normal human beings, that's when everything got easier for me. And that's where I stopped swinging and missing so much, because I started connecting, so to speak, because I had the relationship. I was able to gain their trust. Once I gained their trust, I was able to get the interviews that I couldn't get before.
I love that. So what's your biggest home run?
I think it's, and by the way, just to go back real quick, I was just thinking of this, is what I just said is not advice of how to be a great interviewer. What I just said is how to connect with with any successful business person,
Connecting.
big time CEO, someone that you've struggled. And you know, if you could always go relational over transactional, the transactional will usually happen if it's supposed to. But you can, you
Yeah.
know, we shoot ourselves in the foot so much. So you know that's where that lesson applies. But I think biggest home run for me, um, it's one of two things. From a television standpoint, it was having every door shut on me. This is 1994, so we didn't have internet, or you know, I mean, you had to do some, you had to do it the old-fashioned way. It was kind of the end of that era, and I was just about ready to call it quits. I mean, I had been rejected from 15, 20 different stations around the country, small towns. And and I talk about this in some of my speeches. I wrote about it in the book a little bit too. Is I just started cold calling TV stations, and I try to tell everybody. Most people hate cold calling. If you like it and you're good at it, you've got a gift that most people don't have. I fall under the category like most. I don't like it, but this was my dream. This was my last chance. If I didn't get it, I was going to go work at the local restaurant and, you know, flip some hot dogs and hamburgers and probably manage that place for twice the amount of money I would have made to start broadcasting. But that was never my dream. And so the home run there was that I started cold calling television stations, making up stories that I was passing through their town next week, or in 2 weeks would they be around. I was never going to those towns, but the second they said yes, you can pop by next Wednesday, or you can pop by on the 25th, I suddenly hopped in my car, drove across the country just to go and shake a hand. And then suddenly the job offer started coming. So that was the home run that I don't think if I ever did that, I would never have been in the business. I don't know where I would have gone. And then the second home run was just starting the speaking business and everything that came with it, the podcast, the book, because that over the last 4 years has opened up a new world to me, and one where I'm able to really use my creativity and my passions. And so being on this podcast with you, meeting you, and so many others, that never happens without having taken that step, because now suddenly I start meeting the Jill Underwoods of the world and all professions. And so, yeah, maybe you would have called and said, hey, can I have you on my podcast to talk about baseball or something? But we may never have met, and not have met in a business way. And so, you know, I love doing this stuff now, but it's just, this was never part of the dream. But it was a home run to sort of jump into something at the same time and have this whole second career.
I love that. In the speech that I heard you speak at, and I'm sure that you probably have some of these in your current message. Share with us some one or two of your most favorite baseball stories. Was there a particular player that you were just found fascinating, or was there something amazing that happened, you know, during the World Series? I would love to hear some of your favorite special memories with some of these players and these connections that you've made.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got a lifetime of them, and you know, some involve names and role players that sometimes even the diehard fan wouldn't remember, and others involve the superstars. I mean, I still think that one of my favorite stories, and I just told this to a group the other night, is the 2015 playoffs, and the Royals have a former first round draft pick named Christian Colon, who fit every bit of the Royals culture and character, just a leader and a guy that people gravitated towards. But he never really, he was the fourth pick in the draft, and I think 2000, my years start to blend together, 9 or 10, and he just never really made it. He made it to the big leagues, but he was never a star, and that happens, you know. And so here he bats in the last game of the year. They're playing Minnesota. He gets a pinch hit opportunity. So he gets one at bat that game. That's the end of the season. And a month later, in Game 5 of the World Series in New York, he's called on the pinch hit in a tie game. That was the first time he'd come to the plate since the end of the regular season. So after a month of working back to the World Series for the second year in a row, after a month of these thrilling wins against, you know, the Blue Jays and then Houston before that, and now in the World Series against the Mets, in this tie game, he's called up for his only at bat and he gets the game-winning RBI. And the winning pitcher was Luke Hochevar, who was one of my favorite guys too. And he was the first overall pick in all the major league draft in 2006 before I got here, and was supposed to be a superstar starting pitcher. And now suddenly he's turned into a good relief pitcher, and not the role that he ever expected. Yet he's the winning pitcher in Cologne as a role player, not a star, gets the game-winning hit. And so there was so much, to me, significance in that. Like, you never know when it can be you. You never know when that moment might happen. And it doesn't always work out the way you think. And you might not always be as in as big of a role with your company or whatever it is that you thought. But yet you never know when that moment can come. So that to me was maybe my favorite moment of that 2015 season, among many, many, many others. I think, and I talk about this in just about every speech under the topic of trust. It's in my book, I think, chapter 4 under trust, is that Albert Pujols is the greatest baseball player I've ever covered. And I mean, he's in a class when you start mentioning some of his numbers and historic feats with the Willie Mays and the Hank Aaron and the Babe Ruths. I mean, he's that good. And I was there from him for day one in 2001. And so one of my favorite stories is just to talk about the fact that it took me, and this was really that moment that I was speaking about before with the swing and miss. It took me till 2007 to earn his trust. It took me the better part of 7 years to earn his trust, and I'd gone about it all wrong. And so to have finally been able to connect with the greatest player, I believe the greatest athlete or greatest player that I've covered in all my years in sports, to a point where he was willing to do anything for me, was really a powerful thing, and one that changed me forever. So there are a million of them. I mean, the beauty of baseball, and now in this role, doing, depending on what our TV schedule is, on a light year maybe 150, but most years we're doing about 160 games, is stuff happens every day that you could never have expected. And sometimes it's with guys that people will never remember. I mean, I wrote about one recently on all my social media about a kid that was called up from the minor leagues. He'd been up a couple of years before. Last minute.
Story. Please tell this story.
Yeah.
I love this story.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short of it is, kid's name is Gabe Spire. He had played in 7 or 8 games in 2019, 7 or 8 games in 2020, and he was back down in the minors and has had a good year. And I wouldn't say off the radar, but certainly not top of the radar, at least for fans. And they're short on pitching. They have to put one of their guys on the injured list, Wade Davis, start from 2015, and his last minute. So my guess is that these guys go out and they play catch every day, usually sometime in the afternoon, just to see how their arms feel, and something must not have felt right. And so they call him at I think it was 5:50, and let him know they need you up in the big leagues. And they'd gone through a lot of relief pitchers the night before, so they were going to be short. If the starting pitcher didn't last long, they were going to be in some trouble. Guys, they take care of these guys' arms. If they're not feeling right, they give them a day off. And these expensive arms and a lot of medical stuff involved, and so they're very careful that all teams are. And this kid calls his wife, and she's 2 blocks away in their apartment, and says, we're going to Kansas City, and they need us as quick as possible. And so she packs up the apartment in Omaha and packs up their dog and picks them up, and they're on the road a half hour later, and he pulls into the stadium. He drove the whole way. She's kind of monitoring the phone and the score, and he's stretching while he's driving, completely empty stomach. And he shows up at the stadium and gets dressed and figures he'll go in and go sit in the dugout or head out to the bullpen. And somebody comes racing in and says, you got to hurry up. They need you now. And he thought it was one of his buddies just messing with him. I mean, you typically have a little bit of time. He was in the game 20 minutes after he arrived at Kauffman Stadium. We had video of him running out to the bullpen. He went to say hi to his manager. He goes, no, you got to go now. And suddenly he's on the mound facing the number 5 home run hitter in the American League, strikes him out. And his wife had just walked in, and they wouldn't let her in. And she got the dog. So, yeah, but my husband's about to pitch. So she's sitting in the stands with the dog. And, the rest is history. So it's, but there's, and that's what I love now about the speaking, is before it would have been like, wow, that's really cool. And now I sit there, and we would tell that story the next day. But now I sit there and think, okay, what's the greater meaning? The meaning is always be ready. You never know when your moment's going to come. They haven't called your number yet. You haven't gotten that promotion. Something's not going on. Keep on working. Keep on pushing, because you never know. It could be you next. And he was ready, and he delivered, and he made an incredible impression.
That is one of the most funnest stories. And I remember when that happened, and that was so fabulous. And I think that we are just going to end on that. Your message is so smack on. And that's what I love about baseball too, is, you can show up and strike out, but it doesn't matter if you struck out then. You still got to show up to the plate the next time, and you never know when it's your turn. And the teamwork and the synergy, because it takes a team, to win the World Series. It takes a village to put a mortgage loan together and get you to the closing table.
It does.
And I love your message so much. Please tell my listeners where they can find you, your website and your socials. Where can my listeners follow you and grab your book and your podcast?
I'm on all the social, so that's just easy. But I'm generally under either Goldberg KC or Joel Goldberg KC. Twitter's more baseball. Everything else is more everything else. The website's joelgoldbergmedia.com. Making a few final changes, so hopefully it's up and running. But always tweaking.
We'll always have to tweak.
The podcast is always rounding the bases. And I'm speaking all over on these topics, but I'm easy to get a hold of. Just search, you find me, and I'm all over the place. And the book, you can get the book either through the website or Amazon's really the easiest. It's been fun, and I'm excited for whatever's next.
Well, I'm sure what's next for you is going to be very large and very great. You are amazing, and I'm so proud of you and all that you have accomplished in the last few years. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jill. I appreciate it. I'm grateful for your support. I'm grateful to have had the chance to meet you, to stay in touch, and I know much more coming.
Yes, thank you. Well, everybody, there you have it. Joel Goldberg. He's an icon and such a wonderful message. If you need a speaker at an event, I would love to see you. Reach out to Joel, get his book, listen to his podcast. Such a fabulous message from a fabulous man. Thank you so much. So Little Tweaks, Giant Wins. I'm signing off for now. Have a great day. And thank you again, Joel.